Welcome to the Closing the Trust Gap podcast. The purpose of this podcast is to visit with leaders from a wide variety of vocations and industries who are unafraid to have honest conversations about how organizations can become more trustworthy. My name is Corey Shear, and I'm the founder and CEO of Trust-Centric Consulting and the author of the book titled Closing the Trust Gap. I truly hope that this conversation is helpful and will inspire you to take action on strengthening trust. Well, welcome back to the Closing the Trust Gap podcast. It is great to be with a friend of mine named Holly LaBoda. Holly, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Corey. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, you're very welcome. And we met through a couple of people. One individual that we both know is Trey Griggs, and Trey introduced me to Jennifer Karpus-Romain, who is in charge of the TMSA. And then Jennifer invited me to come up and do a keynote speech at the TMSA Executive Summit last fall in Chicago. And then that's where you and I connected and we met there. And as I was learning a little bit more about you and what you're really focused on with the work that you do, I really resonated specifically in the area of situational leadership, which we're going to dig into a little bit later in this episode. But that is an area of expertise that you have, that you serve clients with. But in addition to that, you do other things. So would you just take a moment to introduce yourself and share with our audience exactly who you are and what you do?
Sure, happy to. So Holly LaBoda, hi everyone. So I am one half of the team, the management team at Luminaries Consulting. So our company focuses on logistics and perishable food and beverage spaces, helping companies get, keep, and grow their ideal customers. And that can look lots of different ways. A lot of it is kind of sales and account management, skill development, process execution, strategy. But also, especially as we started to get underway with that, we've been in business for about 6 years, we learned that you can only go so far by focusing on the sales strategy, skills, process, if the leadership isn't on board and supporting those change behaviors. So we also expanded back into leadership development, which both my partner and I have background in. And we have since started doing situational leadership and other leadership courses, in addition to our more kind of commercial focused kind of practices.
That's great. And are you surprised? I know I am, because I talk about situational leadership at various times, certainly not as much as you all do, and certainly not as in depth as you do. But does it surprise you at the number of people who have perhaps never heard of situational leadership?
Yeah, it is kind of funny because it's like my partner is definitely like more a situational leadership expert than I am. But it's funny because it's been around for a long time, and it's such a proven model, based in all this research, all of this like data about the results that organizations have had. But it's still one that most of the people I talk to about it have not heard of it unless they have been a part of a big organization in the past that has done it.
Right. Or perhaps they've read the book, The 1 Minute Manager, which is a popular book that Ken Blanchard and Robert Hersey wrote. But it's just surprising to me. It's also when you either introduce somebody to it or you reintroduce them to it, I find one of the biggest barriers that people have with situational leadership is it's difficult for them to think about their leading of others in terms of a series of leadership acts that is based on each individual task. So we have kind of these general philosophies of leadership of how we lead and how we want to be led. But what situational leadership does so well is it articulates that for every task, even if someone is advanced in their skill level, generally speaking, there may be a task that you introduce to them that they need a high level of direction and support. And so anyway, all that to say, I'm curious how you all, when you teach companies about situational leadership, what does that program, for lack of a better term, what does that experience look like for you?
Well, how we bring that to companies looks different, kind of depending on what that company wants, how many people, like all of that kind of stuff. We have it as a standalone offering. We do some public sessions. We do it privately at companies. We also have a broader leadership program that is one part of. So it just kind of depends on what their leadership journey and needs look like. And we kind of put together a different approach based on that.
Yeah, and I shared this slide at the TMSA Executive Summit last fall, but the slide about the Great Resignation and how in
Mhm.
2022, 50.5 million people left their jobs, and now that left a significant gap and a vacuum in a lot of companies, specifically in their mid-manager or supervisor level. Are you seeing that consistently, that the need for upskilling or even backfilling those leadership skills for mid-level, supervisory level positions is so vital right now?
Yeah, and I think I remember taking a picture of that slide, I think, when you shared it, at your keynote, but I think that it has that definitely explains why it's such a prevalent issue right now, but it's
Mhm.
definitely something that we have noticed even over the last, 10 years of doing this kind of work inside and externally from companies, is that like, the meaty middle of management, like that middle manager group, is so critical to an organization's
Mm,
success, yet dramatically underinvested in,
yeah.
especially because a lot of times people will get into those roles because they were good at their last job. They're a good
Yes.
individual contributor. And then it's like, okay, pat, pat, here you go. Fly away, little birdie, have fun. Don't screw it
Yeah.
up too badly.
Yes.
And that's, really not fair to anyone to not give that kind of support. Or even when they have the leadership, it's a once and done, or it's theoretical, or,
Mhm.
it doesn't happen for years after being in the position. But that middle management job is hard. They're expected to kind of understand the vision,
Yeah.
understand their function of their employees, kind of be pulled in both directions, and just kind of have to deal with all of these different masters and do every job possible. And they're just not given enough support. So it's really hard. There's no bench. And then even with like some like that happened before the Great Resignation.
Right,
And
right.
add in all of that, and it's a pretty dire situation sometimes.
It is, and even connecting it briefly back into situational leadership, if somebody is leading a group of people for the first time, to your point, they may have been at a very high level developmentally in their last job,
Yep.
but now they're in a new job, which is a completely new task that requires a completely different skill set and a way of thinking. But if they are treated as if they are an expert in the same way that they were an expert in their last role, that's where there becomes a gap. And
Right.
of course, I'm really passionate about talking about the trust gap. That's the title of the podcast. And you're exactly right, where the middle manager, they're the ones standing in that gap. They're holding both ends of that rope
Mm,
that's being pulled both ways. And unfortunately, that gap can feel very lonely and it can isolate them. And it, to your point, it is a significant challenge for a lot of companies. I also find this kind of interesting dynamic with middle managers, or in the case of like a large school district, maybe a principal, where that middle manager or the upper middle manager, they are both leading up. They are a manager, but they are also a CEO if they have a
mm,
large department. And so they have almost their own organizational leadership that they have to execute on, but then they also have to be in the middle of all of the other dynamics. And it can be a significant challenge. So for
right.
you, though, we were just before we hopped on to the podcast, we were talking about the impact and the vital importance of why this is so critical in terms of how it relates to the customer
Mm.
experience. Can you share a little bit about how you've seen companies that you've worked with as a result of them taking on the principles that you teach them and the frameworks that you walk alongside them with, how that actually not only affects their internal culture, but also the customer experience?
Right, right. I think that the concept of trust is so critical to, we think about, customer relationships needing trust. In theory, if I ask you to think about that, you're like, oh yeah, that probably makes sense, right?
Mm,
But I loved the way that you position that the trust proposition connects so much with a lot of the work that we do with our clients. We work with value propositions, of course, because you need to be
mhm.
able to communicate
Yeah,
value in a way that makes sense to your customers. But if they don't trust you, it doesn't matter. It does
right.
You're not going to keep that. You're not going to get that business, let
Yeah,
alone keep that business. So I think it's really important to connect that stuff. And then if you bring it back to the employee manager thing, if employees are not feeling trusted and trusting in their organization, how do you think they're going to get their customers to trust them?
They
It's
won't.
such like it's all so interconnected, like this big web of trust or distrust, that's really interesting, and that can be overwhelming, but you can start to pick that apart. I think by some of that's why I said I loved your books because it's really giving some tactical advice for how to solve for some of this.
Yeah, thank you. And that's the hope, is that it doesn't have to be mysterious or ethereal. I do think that if something is known as um, unattainable or squishy, or it's maybe just up to the personality of the leader or whoever's in charge, like they're into that, but the rest of us are not. I think that the insidious part about that attitude towards work is that it becomes just something to excuse a lack of effort and results too, as opposed to taking accountability for, no, I am the owner of this particular area, or it's my responsibility to continue to strengthen trust, or we have to make sure that we get on the same page about not only what does a value proposition look like, but what does a trust proposition, what does a framework of trust look like? Because if we have all of these different versions or iterations of what it means to trust, then it's going to be difficult to be on the same page. So how is it then that what are some of the biggest opportunities that you all see in terms of helping companies create kind of a new version of their truth moving forward? Meaning, when you step into an organization, what do you see as some of the biggest gaps that you were able to help fill with them?
Well, I think the gaps really differ, of course, by every organization. There's different pieces depending on their strategy and what kind of skills are already kind of in their business that they maybe have to shore up. But one of the things that I think I tend to see like thematically is that people like organizations will have employees that they build their skills in, they will have strategies that they're trying to achieve, but they don't always think enough about the ecosystem that's surrounding their current processes. Like one of the quotes, and I'm going to forget who to attribute this to, so don't
Yeah.
don't get mad at me about that. But
I won't.
your current systems are set up exactly for the results that you're getting today. So,
Yeah.
for example, we'll work with people who are like, all of our deals are transactional. We really want some more like contract consultative business. Our employees need to consult with our customers, but they're incented for transactional sales. Their systems are
Mhm.
set up for transactional processes. They're being managed for transactional results. So, how are you expecting them to do things differently?
Yeah.
So, thinking about all of that stuff is usually where we try to start because that's where people will get more ROI. And I
Okay.
think it
And
connects to
yeah,
trust too, because you're like, you're an employee and you're like, well, you're telling me to do this, but you're not incenting me to do this in any other way. So it
right.
sounds kind of like garbage. I don't trust it.
Yeah,
So
it's
yeah,
yeah, telling me one thing, but you're measuring me on something else, and if I
yeah,
don't do this, then and so it's that is theoretical. The way that you kind of want it to be is theoretical. It's not actually connected to how we're wired as an organization. But
right.
the rewiring, I don't know if you've ever been a part of like a remodel in a house, but
Mm.
when you're done with
Unfortunately, yes.
when you're done with the remodel of a house, the one thing that you want to do is never remodel a house again. And if you have to do anything like a remodel in the future, you're just going to go buy a different house, because it's so much work, it's so disruptive. And how is it that you help a a leader or a leadership team begin to walk into their need for doing some remodeling, some rewiring? Like, how do you walk them gently into that process?
Yeah, it is a delicate balance, I will say, because we find like a lot of salespeople probably find is like because I'm a salesperson too, that a lot of times like we're not losing deals to competition, we're losing deals to inaction because of
Mm,
exactly what you're saying. People are like, oh, this is great in theory, but once I realize how much effort that's going to take, how much it's going to cost me in terms of organizational like focus or time or that kind of thing, then it's like, maybe it's not worth it.
yeah.
So we really spend a lot of time up front kind of figuring out, okay, what are the results that you want to see? What's standing in your way of getting that today? What
Mhm.
are all of the things that might need to be shifted? But what are the first couple of steps?
Yeah.
And how can we get you started and make those first couple of steps as painless as possible, but
Mhm.
also get you results as quick as possible? So we really try to make it as easy as possible to do the right thing.
And do you typically work with the CEO, with the COO, with the CFO? Is it a combination of? Do you work with the management team? Obviously, it probably depends on the client itself, but who do you tend to work with the most in terms of the strategic direction that you provide for them?
It depends on the company and it depends on the company size.
Mhm.
But for most of our clients, we tend to work with kind of like a head of sales, regardless of title. Like it always looks different. A head of sales or a kind of sometimes a CEO in a smaller organization or a CEO that's really involved in these kinds of things. But a head of sales or a chief of some sort tends to be our kind of initial targets.
Okay. And prior to you launching the consulting work that you've been involved in now for several years, can you tell me a little bit more about the work that led up to that and even the reason why you made the decision to go out on your own?
Yeah, yeah. So I have, for 10 years prior to starting Luminaries Consulting, I was working internally at a logistics organization, a pretty big logistics organization, and doing a lot of the same stuff that I'm doing today, that our company is doing today. So helping with like go-to-market strategy, sales process execution, talent development, leadership development, all of that stuff throughout the time.
Mhm.
And before that, I was like an airline doing some similar things. So all kind of
Mhm.
different places. But I really, really love like this big hairy problem, like you're talking about, like these remodels that nobody wants to touch. I love those complex problems because they're tough.
Yeah.
But I'm the kind of person that like gets really, really bored with repetitive stuff.
Yeah.
So I'm like, give me a new problem, let me solve it, and then like I don't want to solve that again for you.
Yeah.
Like
And then
let's
let's
just do
move
this.
on. Yeah.
Yeah,
Move on
let's
to the
find a
next
new
problem.
problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was part of the reason that the consulting nature was really appealing to me, is because I could do a lot of those complex and different kind of problem solving with lots of different companies. And of course, like then it lets you kind of expand your impact. I like to make lots of impact, lots of places. So
Yeah.
that was kind of the catalyst.
What was the hardest part about launching the business?
Taking the leap.
Yeah.
It's such a, I mean, I'm sure you can appreciate this,
Yes.
that, you know, I had a stable job. I had a good gig going. I had a
Yeah.
family. I was actually
The
pregnant with my first child when we started, like the worst time to be doing
yeah.
this, right?
The
But
paycheck just magically appears every 2 weeks.
yeah, right? But so it was hard to like take the leap, to have enough faith in yourself to
Yeah.
go there, but also like there's a lot of, you know, there's a lot of people that surround you. I didn't have a bunch of kids at that point. Like I just had the little one inside. But I had a husband, I had a mortgage, I had all of those things. And I'm like, jump in this boat with me and like
Wow.
trust me to take this leap. It's tough, but it is so, so, so worth it.
I couldn't agree more. My jump date was April 2nd, 2023, and there have been several people that they either want to do that or they've been thinking about it or they're at a crossroad. It's interesting to talk with people about it, and one of the things that I always encourage them in is I think it's important that you answer 2 questions before you do anything. The first question is, what is it that you want to do?
Mm,
Because I don't think that we ask ourselves that question very often. So, what is it that you want to do? And then the second question, which is the call to action, is what are you waiting for?
mm,
And for me, that question is deeply embedded in kind of my journey because as I considered what the next 20, 25, 30 years will look like, I had to make a decision on the path and the choices that I wanted to make now versus storing up for later. And for me, it's a very personal decision, obviously, and it came down to that. And thankfully, my wife, she said, I would rather you jump and try and fail than not try at all. And it was like, okay,
absolutely.
we got to go. We got to jump.
Yep, absolutely. And I think that's one thing that's kind of driven me is that I never want to have a life where I'm looking back with significant regrets, you know, and I was
Mm,
like, I just wish I would have said yes to that thing.
yeah.
And that felt like it's, I owned the domain name for our organization 9 years before I started. So this was something I wanted for a long time, but it's
Wow.
scary to take the leap. And I never wanted to look back and say, I wish I would have done it.
Wow, that's
So,
incredible. That the waiting, but also the vision that you had, and being okay with, I'm gonna put a stake in the ground for the however much I'm paying a year for this domain name, and then
mhm.
to be able to breathe life into it. That's amazing. Tell me about the name. Where does the name Luminaries come from?
Yeah. So that was like a random brainchild in my 20s. And that's like before I even decided what the company was going to be about, really. Like that was the
Mm,
name we wanted. And it was really because the idea of a luminary is like somebody that stands out in any crowd,
mm,
like somebody that you notice when you walk into a room. They always have people around them. They are achieving more seemingly, than other folks. And we're like, so many people and companies and teams have the potential to be luminaries. So
yeah.
how can we make more of them? And
Yeah.
that's like, it's still like, I'm actually getting goosebumps talking about it right now. I love that so much. I want to help so many people, teams, organizations just be as much as they can be,
Yeah.
in different ways. But that's really fun.
That's great and very inspiring. And when you think about what is one of the things that really tends to hold people back from being a luminary, what has that experience been for you? What do you tend to see over and over and over that you then see as an opportunity to really come alongside and help them?
That's a really good question. I feel like it's different depending on the level. Like if you're asking me about well, it might all be the same. So I was thinking at an individual level, like a person,
Mhm.
being their full potential, their best self, their own version of a luminary. I feel like a lot of it is just kind of riddled in our own like limiting beliefs. Like, this is who I think I am. This is what I think I can't do. This is what I think I can do. And I was going to say that that's different at the team and the organizational level, but actually, I don't think it is. I think
Mm,
we all have these ideas about what we do or don't do, what we should or shouldn't do, who we can and can't be. And it's all truly like our own limitations that we're
yeah,
putting on ourselves. So sometimes just like getting out of that trap that you
yeah.
created in your own mind is the most freeing part of everything.
Yeah, so well said. And as you were saying that, I thought about when we get spun up in that false narrative, that's actually not the truth.
Right.
And so if we operate with a false sense of truth, then that can have a significant impact on our own leadership, on our own team dynamic, on our company, even the success of our company. One of the things that Kurt Bartolich and I found with our national research is that as the level of trust drops within an organization, employees actually tend to get lazier. And they
Mm,
admit that they're like, I am getting lazier because I don't trust my leader. And
yep.
that is a powerful, the word lazy is a very powerful, we can hide it with things like unproductive or we missed the mark or the
Yep.
target, but they admit it. They said, I feel myself getting lazier when I have a low trust relationship with a leader.
Right. And
And
that
so
makes so much sense. I mean, we can all put ourselves in that spot. Why am I going to beat my head against the wall for somebody who wouldn't do it for me?
that's right. And then
You
our
know?
loyalty, instead of our loyalty being trust based, our loyalty is more positional or convenience, where it's, I don't want to give up this paycheck. I only have a few more years left to retire. This is
Mhm.
my identity. This is what I'm known for. I don't know anything else. But if we can surround ourselves with people who can speak truth into our life that we trust, perhaps they will encourage us and coach us within that space, or even encourage us to look elsewhere, which is a leap, but it's, for some of us, that's exactly what we need to do. Um,
Right.
so Holly, as you, one of the things I want to make sure that I'm helping facilitate is, if any of our listeners are really interested in the work that you all do at Luminaries and they want to connect with you, what are some of the common types of organizations that you typically work with? Size of the
Mm.
organization, even, I know there's some industry specific work that you all do, of course, but I know that the work that you do is also industry agnostic. But how would somebody learn more about the work that you do specifically and then get a hold of you?
Yeah. Well, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, so you can always find me there, Holly LaBoda. Our website is also a great kind of source of information, luminariesconsulting.com. So those are great starting points. But yes, we work with a lot of companies that are of all different sizes, but really a lot of like mid-market kind of companies that
Mhm.
are going through a lot of times experiencing what we call growth leaps. So they've
Mhm.
gone from like a certain size and or a certain kind of strategy, and they're like, okay, now I want to start doing something a little bit different. How do I get there? Or I've grown to this point and now I got to figure out how to scale to make that sustainable.
Yeah.
So sustainable scaling is kind of a big undertone of what we do too. So those are kind of some organizations that tend to get a lot of benefit from us. Of course, we work with all different kinds and sizes, but
You bet. That's great. And um, one last question for you. Let's say that on our call or on our Zoom today or our podcast, we have a leader that is upper middle management, but they're relatively new to that leadership role.
mm,
And they're trying to wrap their brain around their workplace culture. And they're seeing the effect of some of those dynamics and inefficiencies with even their customer conversations or even their
yeah.
sales process. If you are able to speak directly to that new leader, what would be perhaps a word of encouragement for them to consider and to begin to take action on? What are some of the steps that they should begin taking in order to start seeing a change?
Mm. So I'm a big fan, if you're not familiar with it, or this new leader that we're talking about hypothetically, of the book, The First 90 Days. I think that's what it's
Yeah,
called.
it's a great book.
And that process is something that I recommend for anybody taking a new gig, or just somebody, even if it's not like a brand new leader and you're just saying, hey, I'm at a point in my journey where I need to start doing something else. And it
Yeah.
works you through kind of what to do to start kind of assessing where you are today, how to put an action plan in place, how to get kind of quicker results so you continue to get buy-in and get momentum. And
Mhm.
just don't be afraid. I guess I'd step out of the book for a second and don't be
Mhm.
afraid to like start thinking big picture about all of the things that are kind of going on in current state, all the possibilities that could be, and start to get your buy-in, start to build the roadmap and the action plan, and just start moving forward, and you'll get people on board once you start
Yeah.
winning. So
Yeah, that's so true. And to capitalize on the new dynamic because it will not be new forever. So you have this really critical window of new, but after about 6 or 8 months, that begins to wear off, and now you're becoming a part of not the new anymore. And
right,
so to capitalize that and to leverage that in a way.
for
Well,
sure.
Holly, yeah, thank you so much for being on the show today, and thank you for all of the work that you do. And you're in the Minnesota, Minneapolis area, correct?
Yep, yep,
But I assume that you travel all over the place, but your home base is up north, a little bit north of Kansas City, Missouri.
yeah.
And so I just want to say thank you for being on the podcast. Thank you for also your encouragement with the book and with the work that we're doing at Trust Centric. And I'm grateful that you are serving the clients that you do in the way that you do. And I truly hope that if somebody specifically is looking for the type of help that you provide, that they will reach out to you and connect with you and talk with you about what it would look like to engage more formally with luminaries.
Thanks. Well, I hope that too. But yes, I agree. I agree with all of that, Corey. It's been such a pleasure being on here today, but also getting to know you over the last couple of months. I'm a big fan of everything you do.
Thank you, Holly. Appreciate it. And I hope you all join us again for our next episode of Closing the Trust Gap. Thanks again, Holly.